Welcome to this Viaggio Plus webinar. Today's topic is mobility as a service, the new transport paradigm. We are very happy that so many people find this topic interesting and have chosen to participate today. And we were actually so overwhelmed with registrations for this that we've decided to do a second webinar in 2 weeks' time. But back to today, the agenda for today is first an overview of the Mars Alliance and the work that's happening in this group, which will be done by me, Rasmus Lindholm from APIorg. Then we move on to Mars, the new freedom of mobility from Sampo Hoitinen from Mars, Finland. And we will finish off with Richard Harris from Xerox on the new transport paradigm. And we're going to try to make the presentations precise and to the time, keep the time frame that we've elected, so that there will be time for discussions or answer questions at the end. Just a few practical details. You will be muted during the presentations themselves, but if a question does pop up in your head and you would like to raise it during a presentation, you can actually use the questions section on the panel itself. Where Sylvia here with us will take note of the questions and make sure that they are posted at the end. And then, like we said, there will be a group discussions in the end, and there is a function on the panel, as you see it in the bottom left-hand corner of the slide currently, where you can raise your hand, after which Sylvia can unmute you, and you will be able to, or you'll always be able to speak, but we'll be able to hear what you're saying. So that was a few practical details about the webinar itself. As stated in the agenda, I will start with an overview in terms of what the Mars Alliance is doing. So first off, mobility as a service. I think everyone has their own idea of what mobility as a service is, and one of the things that we want to do in the Alliance is actually to define what we mean by it. So putting the user in the center of mobility, making sure that he or she have access to all different kinds of modes of transport, car, bicycle, train, tram, bus, etc. That in either a package format can use all modes of transport or on a trip-by-trip basis. So this is what we are actually talking about in terms of the mobility as a service. But why are we talking about mobility as a service? It's because our cities are growing and traffic problems are increasing. We all know this. We've seen that there's many new shared economy. There's many new ride sharing that are popping up. There's car sharing, ride sharing, all types of services that are new on the market. Uber is also there. So the offer in terms of moving from A to B is increasing. Together with that, of course, the technology, the use of internet, it's all moving very, very fast. So there are many reasons why we need to be looking at new ways of organizing our transport. I think time has moved on from where everyone is buying a car. We need to look at a better, more economical way of doing this. So in essence, what we actually would like to do is define the role of this mobility operator that you see in the center, so that the user, instead of having to buy a bus ticket for the bus, another ticket for the tram, then jump into a taxi and pay again, that you actually have this either subscription or pay per use, whatever the business model is going to look like. But there's actually one mobility operator that takes care of your needs, not only locally, but also when roaming. Meaning that my Mars subscription to my local operator in Brussels, I will still have access to the Mars services when I go to Helsinki, because Sampo from Mars Finland, as you'll hear in a minute, will take care of that part together with my Mars operator. So it will actually be completely transparent for me. Similar to roaming from your mobile phone, you have your own subscription at home, but your phone works pretty much everywhere in the world, but you still only get one bill from your local provider. So because of all these initiatives that are popping up in many different cities and many new businesses in the game, we actually decided during the ITES World Congress in October last year to form a Mars Alliance. Because one of the things that we really want to achieve is a single market. We want to make sure that this is scalable. We want to avoid that it's proprietary systems that do not work when you're traveling from one city to another. So in essence, we decided someone has to sit together and try to define some overall guidelines, some open APIs, interfaces, look at legislation in terms of how this can happen, etc. So we decided to form a Mars Alliance in Bordeaux. And on this beautiful picture, you see Jakob from FIA, Anna Berner, the Minister of Transport from Finland, and Richard Harris, which will also speak a little bit later. So the objectives, I briefly touched upon it. It's really to support the development of this single European market. Look at what kind of Mars services could actually be put in place, looking at a toolbox for the Mars operators, guidelines for the operations itself, and how could we facilitate a cooperation between the different modes of transport. That's going to be one of the big challenges, is actually to figure out how do we share the data, open the data, define the interfaces between how the different modes of transport are currently planning. And of course here, there's going to be a difference in the more traditional established transport operators versus these new type of mobility services that are popping up. And another last part of it is, of course, the information campaigns. I think the marketing of Mars to explain the benefits both to the end user but also to the authorities in implementing something like this is also a very important part. So a snapshot of current members of the Alliance. It's growing day by day, which we're really proud and happy about. But you have a mixture of organizations, of operators, public transport operators, service providers. So I think already to start with, there's a very good mix of the different stakeholders required. Basically, we have 4 working groups that have already started their work. We will have a meeting during the European ITES conference next week, so Monday, to do a short status update of where the different working groups are. And the aim of the Alliance is actually to have a first draft ready from the work of the working groups in January next year. So single market, Mars Finland is responsible for this, looking at a high-level business model because we have to agree on something for this to work, definitions, stakeholders, user groups, etc. User perspective has been looked after by Chalmers University because we do have to figure out what specifically it is the users would like. And there we have to differentiate between the different target groups. Older, younger generations might have different needs or different perspectives in terms of which services would they actually like. Then, of course, there's a lot of technical elements that needs to be sorted, open APIs, interfaces between back-end systems, etc. Billing, clearing, how do the payment technically actually happen? That makes sure that when I'm jumping into a taxi in Finland, that specific taxi will actually get paid for the ride through whatever system that we put in place. So that's also an important part of it. And then, of course, the legal framework, which is headed up by ITS UK, because we've learned that the legal aspects and the policies in the different member states are quite different. In some cases, you are not even allowed to resell tickets for public transport, which will make it very, very difficult for a Mars operator to provide its services to the end users. There's also a competitive directive that needs to be looked at. There's different elements of this. Today, we see public transport operators, which are subsidized by the government, moving into an area where also private business are coming into. So a question then becomes, is that then a level playing field? So again, there's quite a few things that needs to be looked after regarding the legal framework. So that was a quick overview from my side. Like I said, the working in the Alliance is open to everyone who wants to participate and join the work of the Alliance, to make sure that the guidelines, the technical elements, etc., are developed in a right direction. Our aim is definitely that on a high level, the Alliance will set the framework of how mobility as a service will operate in Europe. We're also in very close contact with the European Commission, and I know mobility as a service is very high on the agenda of both DG Growth, DG Move, DG Connect, and DG RTD. So there's quite a lot of support from the Commission in terms of mobility as a service. And then I'll finish up with next week. Like I said, there is the ITES, European ITES conference, and there's going to be many sessions and events around mobility as a service. So if you are interested and you are in Glasgow next week, I can only suggest that you stop by to hear some of the discussions that are happening in the different sessions. Thank you very much for listening.
All right.
With that, we're going to move on. We're going to move on to the next speaker, which is Sampo from Mars, Finland. Sampo, the phone is yours.
Phone is all mine. Let's see. Okay. I'll try to go more into practicalities and but a little bit something about the phenomena itself. It's been actually roughly about 10 years that I've been talking about the phenomena, but somehow everything started a few years back, and it started getting wind, and it's been strange. I've been doing this, telling about the whole concept roughly about a bit over 1,000 times now. And whenever I talk to normal people, journalists or politicians, they always catch it pretty fast and say, okay, yeah, this is exactly how I would want my mobility to be purchased. Whenever I talk to professionals, it starts with, oh, this is hard. And that's pretty much what's kept me going so far. Lots of it happened 5 years ago when in Finland we made the analogy about the telecom industry and what happened and what were the opportunities back then. And our ministry started pushing the agenda. And of course, in the ITES Europe 2014 in Helsinki, I think that the topic of MaaS really popped up. Lots of companies, lots of cities, lots of governments started to look into this. But at that time, I remember in the ITES Europe 2014, and actually even sometimes afterwards, some journalists have asked me, when could we see this live somewhere? And my thoughts were somewhere beyond 2020. But sometimes the world is faster than you expect, and I'm pretty certain that already this year, at least in a couple of parts in the world, we'll be able to see the actual service live. So, how I see what MaaS is, it's the sort of first trick and the first magic is get you from any A to any B really easy. But that's not enough, because eventually, like from the last slide, one of the strongest feelings that people have is the thought of freedom of mobility, where I have to say T4 was a beautiful dream, giving freedom of mobility to everyone. So you have to actually do that. You have to cover the service promise. And eventually, I think nowadays we have enough of opportunity, we have enough of offering to actually guarantee you a service level that is comparable with owning a car. It's pretty easy to show nowadays. Actually, when flying to places, you start seeing businessmen talking about different apps that they have for their mobility, and oftentimes they get up to 20, 30 even, or even more of apps that they use for their daily mobility or their ground transportation. And eventually, they always, those discussions end up with saying, why can't I just have everything in one? Why can't this be easier? Something like this. And I think this has always been sort of the thing that captures MaaS, is to say, okay, why couldn't I have it just like my teleoperator or like Netflix? In an easy way, access to everything, but I think it has to be even further. You have to be able to show the people, okay, this is how I guarantee your freedom. This is how I do it. I'd say the business case, and not just the business case, but everything around MaaS has to do with, can you be as good as ownership of cars? Because that's where the money is, that's where the big sort of also problem from city's perspective is. But it doesn't happen with managing or trying to push people into direction. Because nowadays I think that what MaaS can bring is we can have something that is as desirable, as good, or even more desirable, better than owning your own car in delivering the actual service of freedom of mobility, especially with the young urban ones. They're not so hooked or obsessed about the ownership anymore. They want everything easy, set, and free for them. What we want to be, like Rasmus showed, something's been missing here for the end user. I've heard years and years for MaaS, big players, cities, governments, many of the companies, transportation providers saying, yes, MaaS is a good thing, we want to enable it. And whenever I've asked the question, but who takes it all the way to the end user and really does the packaging and marketing and all of that, lots of people look into the ceiling and say, well, maybe someone else. So at least we've gone into the place of really becoming for the user, the mobility operator that tries to fix everything. Hard task, but actually in many ways easier than I expected before. I have to do this to show why it's important. I'll be trying to talk to lots of academia about this, because normally if you think of the world economy, it needs growth. It needs to do something with innovation that brings about productivity. And if you look at the opportunities here, we're talking the money that people have in their wallets in comparison to what is telecom, which is a nice comparison in that sense, is 10 times as big. If you think of these digitalizations, I heard that the average revenue per user that Facebook can do is about 20 cents. So almost up to that type of market that is being reshaped. Out of that ARPU, roughly about 240 euros out of it has to do with car. Half is using it, half is capital cost. And if that system is used only 4% of the time, at least the potential is huge. At the same time, having said that, the potential is unleashed only through critical mass. So if we can get into high enough penetrations, high enough meaning 5 to 10% of population, then the game begins to be totally different than to anything lower that. And that's, of course, that creates a need of lots of capital, lots of opening up. But if we can do that, and if you try to simulate a city or an area with that type of thing, then it becomes really interesting, also from city perspective. What is different from telecom and many of the other fields? Transport is huge. It's something that none of us, no player alone can do. That's hard. We're used to someone trying to, drive for, I'll get to control, I'll get to do this. But this is an ecosystem thing. Nothing happens if the transportation providers do not open up. So you have to get people taking the leap of faith, the step at the same time. You need all of those players that me and Rasmus showed in the picture to do their part of it. And there needs to be innovation in many levels of this business. But eventually, of course, one of them will have to be the operator that brings it there. I'll show a few of the things that we've done in Finland and what are ongoing. One part of it is the company that I'm running. We have a big dream of changing everything, giving back people more freedom that they actually have now. What we're doing, and actually we're about 2 weeks of first launch, and let's see how that happens. I'm quite excited about it. In a few weeks' time, we'll be able to show the first cases of this. Show at least that it can work in an area. What I find particularly interesting in my learnings about this is if you look at it from the end user perspective, a MaaS cannot be a city MaaS. Try to think of yourself with a teleoperator that only works within one city. It really isn't there. Or you need coverage that is big enough to actually cover at least most of what the car does. And if you don't have that, it's not really that comparable. You haven't really touched the complete set of mobility with that one. That's, at least for us, our evil plan of world domination. want, this is potentially global business, and it is doable. It is even scalable because the bits and parts are already there. If the ecosystem, if Mass Alliance is capable and we get roaming happening, then this is doable and really scalable business. But it's not just that. In Finland, we've had tens of different players moving. Lots of cities opening up, lots of things in government that has to do. There's funding schemes, there's transportation providers that have been opening up to this. There are technical issues, but they're all kind of solving it. It's taken a while because everybody has to sort of figure out the picture and look at the strategy. If an ecosystem changes, you need to look at your strategy towards this change. But I'm quite happy that it's starting, and not only in Finland, but many other places. We're getting there. We're actually getting it. Now it's all about showing it with end user that this is how it can be. I really love Helsinki's vision about this. If it's cryptic here, I could tell in the words of one of the vice mayors is that by 2025 they would like to, and they want to enable a good life without a need or without being forced to own a car. And I kind of like that. It's quite okay to own a car. Not everybody will jump into Mass. But at the same time, it would be kind of fair if you could lead a perfectly good life without being forced to own a car. And if they can do anything about it, they are. And I also like their strategy of not trying to do it themselves, to enable lots of players working in this field to be sort of the catalyst, to open up themselves and to try to push for these services to happen, not just a Mass service. It's a good strategy in that sense. Of course, a new game needs new game rules. What I'm also really happy about in Finnish market is that our ministry is really pushing for this. I suppose they did probably the world record in roughly about half a year. They rewrote every single law. Everything is redone in many ways to enable this digitalization to happen. Mass could be sort of the way of looking at it from the end user perspective, but there are lots of other issues, of course, over there. Lots of it, I honestly, in my opinion, for talking with the politicians, has to do with this is an economical thing as well. It has to do with employment. If there's a big market that is changing, it's good to be the forerunner market in that. I took one of the legislation that I find probably the most important, maybe a bit overlooked, is the roaming law that states that okay, now all transportation providers will have to open up to third-party service providers. It's actually good for their business. I mean, lots of other players selling their tickets, selling their seats in that sense. But that it's written in law makes it easier to rely on that you can actually start with this business, that there's no one stopping you from it, which I really like. Why, and this is my slide, I've talked to many of the cities why they've been interested in this type of policy. It gives new tools. And if the private sector can actually come in to do the job that they actually want to do without them having to spend a lot of money, just making sure that the playing field is good, then it's good for them. Eventually, because they need to worry about how the market works. This is my vision of different ways that the markets can evolve. I wouldn't like it to be the sort of winner takes it all global kind of global market. There's always a threat of that if we're not awake at this stage. I also do not think that a city monopolistic service provision is the durable one. Then the hardest part is the roaming ecosystem, because from the beginning it needs lots more game rules, lots more sitting together. But it also enables lots of new things, not just in Mass operators, but also in the field of new transportation services. Because if I want to have a Segway share, for example, I'd be too niche now to create an app and take my silo all the way to the end user. But if there's lots of Mass operators I can work through, then there are lots of ways of doing different types of services. And it's going to need a lot more innovation than what we have. I don't think that MaaS is just public transport and taxis. It's going to need lots more to actually become what it can be. I'll just show you, this is something that we've done so far, tried to describe what we think is important if you want to get MaaS started. We created this MaaS Readiness Index that will be released, I think, within a few days. In its open domain, we're not going to hide it in a way, just to show that what are the ingredients, in our opinion, what happens. And I'd say at this stage, it comes down to lots more with transport service availability. And especially there, if you go to public transport, most of the other things we can open up. At this stage, it's about opening up the service. And by opening up, I don't need APIs for route planner. I need what is really needed, and what we're looking for in the world are those places that have mobile ticketing and where we can do commercial agreements with public transport, because it definitely is the backbone of a MaaS service. If you don't have that, it's not going to be as good and effective as a picture as it could be. So that was pretty much what I wanted to say. You can go and check out, it's an open place for maasapi.org. How do we see this? This is just one way of looking at it. There are several other ways, but if it helps, please use it. Contact us if you can. Eventually, these are all the things that we need. APIs, if you want to speed up as a public body, I'd say use incentives instead of tendering it. That's a better way. We'll be able to show you this year, at least in Finland, and hopefully someone there is listening and wants to open up, and we're really looking for 2 other areas to open up this year, not in the years to come, this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Sampo. We've actually received 2 questions that I think we should take immediately before we move on. The first question, Sampo, is how do you see the biggest challenge in making the business model work for MaaS?
The business model has to do with, okay, how are people willing to pay? Because they're now, you could say they're overpaying for owning their cars. But they don't really have an understanding of that. Many of the transport professionals know that people, if they're asked to tell how much they're spending in their cars, they normally underestimate that. So how are we able to have enough of a high price to make a really good service that is comparable to what they're spending now? So how can we deliver the same dream and have at least similar price of that, to make sure that there's enough money to actually provide a good enough service. Once we get into the big penetrations, the business case looks much easier. So the second biggest thing for business case is how do we scale fast enough? Oh, I can say a third one. It's getting enough offering capacity for transportation providers.
Yep, and there's another second question for you, Sampo, before we move on to Richard, is how can one ensure that the combination of different transport modes does not result in negative impact? For example, if one connected car pools to public transport in a single offering, there is a risk that travelers will migrate from public transport to cars, resulting in increased congestion, emissions, etc.
I'd say there's always a risk of things changing, and if they change in bad ways. The best way to avoid that is to make sure that public transport is opened up as fast as possible and is as big as possible to actually provide a good enough service. On the other hand, how can we get worse than what we have now? Now we have people owning cars all the time, yeah, so I would say, of course, there are risks of doing it. This is by opening up public transportation, I'd say that's the best way to avoid any of the potentially bad impacts that could be there. I don't see a big risk in it.
And from my side, I mean, it's all about service levels, isn't it? It's about how good of a service does the different transport modes operate. I mean, one of the reasons why Uber's been so successful is they provide a service that people wanted. And of course, there's some taxi operators that's woken up and say, okay, maybe I have to do something with the service that I provide. So I think to a large extent, it also has to do with making sure that the service that you're offering from the public transport perspective is good enough.
Yeah, and eventually people get what they want. It's hard to manage them. So that's the only way of succeeding, is service them really good.
Yeah, fully agree. All right, with that, we will move on to the next speaker, Richard Harris from Xerox. And I think, voila, there you go. I think we can all see your screen now, Richard. So the telephone is yours.
Lovely. Morning, everybody. I'm speaking from Lingfield, which is near Gatwick Airport, south of London. We enjoyed our summer last Friday, and it's now finished. So it's like we're sitting in the middle of a storm. So I hope that the internet connection stays working properly, so everybody can hear me. I'd like to start off by saying that the work that Sampo and the people in the ministry in Finland have been doing over the last few years has been a real inspiration to me. I've been working in ITES for a very long time, and I think we've failed in many respects to unlock the community-wide benefits of ITES. And because we're ITS professionals, we make up our own language to keep people out. And I think that for the first time, mobility as a service could be the way for people to really understand the benefits of ITS as a whole, because it's something that can affect everybody. So I'm really excited about the development of MAS. I'm really a strong supporter of the MAS Alliance, and my objective in working on this, of course, I work for Xerox, so we have to have a business, but I also want to help unlock the community-wide benefits of ITS. And I think as an industry we've failed to do that up until now. So I have great expectations of mobility as a service. You may wonder why some chap from Xerox is talking to you. Well, we're members of the key influential organizations like ERTICO, ITS America, the World Road Association, UITP, and so on. But when it comes to transport, we're also very busy. We do lots. I'll pick out a few of these. Every day we process more than 100 million public transport tickets worldwide. We process more than $5 billion a year in road tolls. We operate in 35 countries, and some of the drivers may not be so pleased about this one, but we process 16 million parking violations every year. And that's important because these parking violations not only help to raise money for the authorities, but they help to keep our cities moving. The biggest thing people can do to improve the quality of their cities is to control parking and to enforce it, because that gives you an opportunity to influence people's behavior. So for me, the important thing is the data. ITS has always been about data and information. And although this slide looks a little scary, it's really quite simple. Can you see my mouse, Rasmus?
Yes, we can, Richard.
Okay, so this is my view of how intelligent transport systems will contribute to the smart cities. So we have a processing capability here in the middle, which I've called the Mobility Analytics Platform. The first thing we have to do and be aware of is what's happening with our different networks. And we can get information from all the systems that we manage. We can get information from people, and we get information from different sensors. So floating car data, which is vehicles driving around, loop detectors in the road, video cameras, CCTV, social media, any way we can get information that gives us a view on incidents, congestion, air quality, capacity, what's happening on our networks. So taking that information and then processing it and turning it into something which is real information and intelligence, and then using that output to manage our systems better, to adjust them so that we get the the throughput that we're looking for and the balance we're looking for, and to inform people. Inform people so that they can take better decisions about how they're going to travel. And I've got some financial transactions in here. They could all be one, but I've separated them into public transport, parking, tolls, and anywhere where you have anything to do with payments, you have some enforcement processing to make sure it all works properly. So one of the key things here is open data. Transport for London has been a world leader in making their data available to other people to use, and the result has been lots of different apps available on the marketplace, so giving people the services and the information they need to be able to conduct their mobility and their travel across London. And of course, the key thing about this is it's all underpinned by a business case. So how do we make sure that we can pay for it? The policy aspects, the user needs, the key performance indicators, so how do we know we're achieving what we want to, and the governance. And going back to the question about if we divert people, if we persuade people to move to more public transport, will it create just more traffic as the roads become less congested? Well, the reason that policy is important is because all of this should be policy adaptive. So if we succeed in moving people from their cars onto other means of transport, we should then be able to adjust the policies that impact on the use of the road. So whether it's congestion charging, whether it's parking availability or cost, whether it's controlling through urban traffic control, the access in and out of the city, whether it's environmental monitoring or low emission zones, the adjustable policy aspects are important so that we can achieve the balance that we're looking for. So all of this comes down to back office processing. This is a vision where information and data comes in and it's understandable, so we can combine it and compare it. Now, I know this is sad, but I do have a favorite back office system. This is a Xerox one, but I'd still be my favorite even if it wasn't. So in Montreal, in Quebec, the public transport is run by 19 different operators. And the people that use the public transport in Quebec, Greater Montreal area, they have access to 3,000 buses, 5 train lines and 4 metro lines. And 1.2 million contactless transactions are carried out every day. So a 12% increase in ridership from when it was a separate system. But the key thing is this single back office for 19 operators, their sensitive data is kept separate and secure just for them. So what this means is not that Xerox is super smart providing its back office, but that the 19 operators are super smart by working together. So they gain the benefits of a single platform. They get the benefits of being able to have compatible data from all of the operators to do high-level data analytics, but at the same time, their sensitive data is kept separate and secure just for them. And this is my vision. I'm not going to answer that, my wife will get that. This is my vision for mobility as a service. A back office system that is a platform that enables new people to come into the marketplace. So the data analytics that we're talking about, which is really important for the city and for everybody involved in mobility, by looking at big data analysis, we can understand and identify new trends in how people travel much easier and much earlier, so visualizing it. This is Nancy in France, where we took where people got onto the public transport network, where they got off, and we could map their movements in large numbers. And what happens is, when you compare that over time, you suddenly see new trends and new routes, and it means that you can be in a position to satisfy that emerging demand before it becomes a problem. So being responsive to people's needs. So as far as we're concerned, data analytics is really important. In ITES, for many years we've been collecting lots of data, but we haven't been exploiting it because it's been too difficult. Now, with the way that computing has changed and modeling has changed, we have a much better opportunity to understand and to learn what's going on. So mobility as a service is changing the way that people are going to be traveling, and it's because, as Rasmus and Sampo have clearly already illustrated, people's attitude are changing. Younger people are not so keen on owning cars that sit there for 95% doing absolutely nothing. So the 18 to 24-year-olds are soon going to represent about 50% of the urban workforce. So it's really important that we provide the services that they need, and that means less reliant on cars, more decisions on the fly, and responding to this desire for the sharing economy and more livable cities. So this is a slide from Los Angeles, and it just shows the explosion in mobility services over the last few years and a projection of what's going to happen. And the problem is, how do you know what's out there? If you don't know, you don't know. We've done a study just recently looking at travel behavior in some Western European cities. So we did cities in the UK, France, Germany, and Benelux. And lots of really interesting things came out of this, like how long it takes people on average to find a parking space, how they travel. But one of the interesting areas is this Generation Z, so, excuse me, so these 18 to 24-year-olds. Now, the future commuters think that by 2025, half of them will have just one single app for all their transport needs. This one's really interesting, I think. More than half will decide where to live and work based upon the mobility services available to them. So how easy is it to get to where they want to go? Social, domestic, business. 37% think they'll be using electric cars, 32% think they'll be using self-driving cars, and 41% will not use cash for transport. So as an ITES industry, we may be focusing on this 37% or this 32%, but actually the biggest demand is going to be urban mobility. How to pay for it, how to travel. Oh, if you want to see the full report, you can just download it from here. So going back, so I just slip back to this one. Going back to this, how do you know what is available? Well, if you don't know, you don't know, and we all travel in the same way. So most of the people on this call will drive the same routes, parking the same kind of spaces, go to the same shops, probably even buy the same thing. Unless somebody shows you a new way, you'll carry on doing that. So this is the London Underground map. Let's, for the sake of argument, say we're at the Embankment and we want to go to Covent Garden to watch the buskers and have a cup of coffee and go around the market. You can see that the way that you get there is up the Northern Line to Leicester Square and then change up to Covent Garden, or you could go up this one, which I think is the, oh, I forget what it's called. Anyway, up this brown line, up to Piccadilly, and then change and get to Leicester Square. And that's what we would typically do, because this is how we do our journey planning. But there is a different way. You can step outside of the Embankment station onto the pavement, and you can walk to Covent Garden in less than 8 minutes. And it feels like less walking than you do changing underground lines in these stations. But unless somebody shows you that, you'll continue travelling in the same way that you've always done. And I think that's why it's important for mobility as a service and for urban mobility for us to be able to explain what's changing, how it's changing, and what the opportunities and the differences are. So we've done a couple of systems. We've got one in Los Angeles and we've got one in Denver in the States. And what we've done is we've worked with the city authorities to provide them with a platform and an app and a journey planner so that people can choose how they travel around Denver, knowing everything that's available. So we've got shows the mobility choices to improve how Denver moves. The individuals can put their preferences in, so least number of interchanges, most green, cheapest, quickest. It has trip planning facilities which shows people the different options and compares the results, has trip details and keeps people's travel history. Now, what we call this is the back office, so similar to Montreal, but what we call this is the mobility marketplace. And what it does for the mobility operators is it gives them a chance to come into the marketplace, they get access to customers, they have a launching platform, and they have a level playing field. What this means is that, let's say there's a new local mobility service which is set up. So maybe it's from some outlying villages into the city or connecting some villages. You can run that on a laptop from somebody's house for a while, but sooner or later you're going to need to do something a bit more sophisticated and a bit more secure with the data. So that mobility service can come into the marketplace and they'll be treated exactly the same as Uber or Lyft. So when it comes to providing people with the options for their travel, all of the options are available. Uber wouldn't get a stronger recommendation because they're bigger than any local company. So access to everything that's available. For the users, they know all of their options. They can have personalized analytics and they can put their preferences in. And for the regions, so they get regional mobility analytics coming out of this back office, they get system optimization, they get public feedback and co-creation, and in the future there'll be a revenue share. So this is what we're doing in Denver. I agree with Sampo that we shouldn't just look at single cities, but we also have to operate in the political environment that we find ourselves in. So if Denver want to make a difference to the people and their balance of transportation, we're helping to satisfy that. We're also doing it in Los Angeles, and we're busy working on a system in France as well. So this for us is the way of helping people get access to those different options. I'll just slip back a minute. And one of the things is that rather than necessarily pay a monthly subscription, which is the MAS Finland preferred approach, well, one of their approaches, we think a single account can also help. So if you don't know what your requirements are going to be, you can have access to the full range of mobility services just by having a single account-based system. This brings me on to Seamless, which is something that we've invented in Xerox, and it's a way of using near-field communications to help people get access to different mobility services. Now the thinking behind this is that with all of these changes in technology, it's really expensive and disruptive for transport companies to keep up to date. So Transport for London, or London Underground for example, if they wanted to change their access gates to include a new technology, it's a huge operation which will involve millions of pounds. So the idea behind Seamless is that this Seamless tag fits onto the bus or the tram or the carpool. You access it by, you pay for your ticket by just making a connection between there, and the back office would do the analytics, the account management, the tag management, customer support, fare collection, trip planning, admin, and tickets and pre-booking. And the advantage of this system, as far as we're concerned, is that instead of building a new back office to run a new way of accessing and paying for public transport services in a city, we will provide the back office, and it means that we can run more than one service on a back office. So like Sampo was saying, not just for one city, we can join this up for many cities. And as an industry, one of the things we've been particularly poor at is exploiting the investment that we make in IT. So let's take a fictitious city that might have a road user charging a congestion charge. They'd have a back office system with names and addresses, vehicle details, credit card details, journey details. They might have a bike hire system. It has its own back office, has the same information in it. They might have free flow tolling right around the outside of the city. It has a back office, all with the same information. We can make the services better by having fewer back office systems that cover more services and a bigger area.
So, Richard, this is Rasmus. I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up. We're running out of time.
Quite rude. Okay.
Yes, I know.
So with Seamless, which you can see in Glasgow next week, it's really simple. The traveller will download the app once. They'll create their bank connections once and travel as many times as they want. And all of this stuff that we've been talking about, it might be called smart cities by some, it might be called better urban mobility by others, but what we're looking to do is to provide more livable cities and regions. And that means hitting these policy objectives. So the economy, safety, inclusion, better mobility, the environment, accessibility for people, efficiency in how we operate, better quality of life, reliable systems, and better health. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Well, you were getting close to the end anyway. It's because we are getting a few questions, and we have 10 minutes left on the webinar, so would like to go through these questions. There's one particular one for you, Richard, in terms of which business model can actually be used to capture the value of the big data analytics. I think you showed an example in your presentation before.
Yeah, whichever business model you take, it can benefit from data analytics because it can identify new opportunities for new mobility services. It can identify new needs, and it can identify what people are actually doing, not what we expect them to do, but what they're actually doing. When the Mayor of London introduced free travel on buses for under 16-year-olds, they thought it would be great. People would travel around a lot more. What it actually meant was that instead of walking 500 meters to school, they'd get on a bus. So not what was expected. So understanding how people actually move, it can help, it can inform all the business decisions.
Thank you. And Sampo, I have another question here for you, which is related to how the data privacy issues are handled in Mars. In combining all these traffic modes, there's going to be a lot of data back and forth, also in terms of the user behavior. How do you plan to solve that issue with Mars Finland?
Well, I think in many ways, many of the privacy laws have already been dealt with. It's not so much different from what we have in telecom. So I think that the privacy issues can be delivered from there. We're actually hoping and expecting from the governments to tell us how do we deal with it. I think one of the biggest issues is that let's assume that a mobility provider is using transport modes or transport service providers, or hundreds or maybe thousands of them. It is quite understandable that for them to be able to improve on their service and get enough data, they will need information about what happened within their transport mode. So at least I would think it would be good for the whole that we deliver as much data to the transportation providers as possible. But this is something that we have to check with the legislation. How much are we willing to do that? But there's an interesting topic that I find a possible future, is that now that we are in a place where the end user is actually paying a lot for the service. Let's say the ARPU is 300 euros. So per user, the biggest market is not selling data in the background. And I see MaaS as also potential in changing the way that we deal in many of the businesses deal with data and getting closer to the my data approach, because if I get from the end user, if I get hundreds of euros a month from the end user, I wouldn't really want to annoy them with selling data somehow in the background. So at least for us, the policy is that the end user decides and owns the data and gets to decide where and how they want to put it forward. There's even a thought that we've had in Mass Alliance that the Mass operators should also enable changing of an operator, and with that also change the data to the next operator to be able to really really not have a lock-in. I don't know if that answered.
I think so. I mean, for me, your last comment, I mean, that's one of the key elements, I think, to not have this login, that there is freedom of choice in terms of your mobility operator by the end user. And of course, the data needs to come with that, because I think only through that will we create a credible mass ecosystem across Europe and beyond that people will buy into. There's another question, which I guess might be more for me, is how does Mass Alliance and the Mass operators that are popping up, how do they utilize all the development that has been done already? And one initiative that's mentioned is the single access point. At least from the Alliance point of view, we have a philosophy in the Alliance that we do not want to reinvent the wheel. We are not there to dictate whatever interfaces or guidelines that needs to be put in place for this to work in the end. We want to cooperate with as many as possible and see a lot of the different things that are already under development and how that can be used or reshaped in a way that is appropriate for mobility as a service. One concrete example of this is I'm actually a coordinator of a European research project called Mobinet that are developing a little bit similar to what Richard mentioned before, a marketplace, e-marketplace for mobility services. So in essence, it is a back-end system with different components that service providers can use, agreements, there's billing and clearing. One of the use cases we have is quite simple. It's around parking, mobile parking. I think that also refers to what you said, Sampo, before, that if you want to go into the mass business, having mobile ticketing is good. It makes things easier. So one of the use cases we have is actually just a simple parking service, and there is a service provider that provides on-street parking in Aalborg in Denmark, in Hungary, in Italy, and in Greece. And the whole thing is using the components and the billing and the clearing in the back end for these 4 service providers to offer their services through the marketplace. And for an end user, that means I can take my Danish app in Danish that I have with my service provider in Aalborg, and I can pay for on-street parking when I go to Hungary, to Italy, or to Greece. But I think it's something like this that we need. So coming back to the question, for sure, we do not want to start from scratch in the Alliance. One of the exercises is actually to gather as much info as human possible in terms of what has been done already, and then look at what we can do again, what we can reuse. So as a reminder, if you have any thoughts or would like to share a comment, all you have to do is raise your hand. You see there's a small button that you can actually press that looks like this. There is...
Richard, it's from article. I have questions regarding one of your slides. You mentioned that by 2025, 50% of travelers will only have one app for all their transport needs. At this moment, by average, I think we have probably 10 to 20. By achieving so, how about the current SMEs who are very active in making mobile apps for different types of mobile for mobility services?
I think there will always be new app developers providing opportunities to access their services and give people information. But I do think that mobility as a service will be the glue that sticks together many of these small niche operators. So the problem is that, with the slide that I showed for Los Angeles, with all of these new apps and mobility services coming online. Unless you know about the services, you can't actually use them. And one of the key factors in launching a new app is how much it costs to get people to understand it and recognize it, and the marketing of it. And I think that the mass operator, whether it's a city or whether it's a separate company or a coalition, that's a position that they will take, and I think it will improve transport for everybody.
Thank you. Time is now precisely 11 o'clock and we've reached the end of the webinar. Thank you very much to all of you for listening. Like I said in the beginning, we will have a second webinar on the 17th of June for this. We've also recorded the presentation, so yes, Richard and Sampo, we will hold you against what you've said. And we will make both the recording and the presentations available on the Viatio Plus website in the online library. So with that, thank you to Sampo and Richard for sharing your thoughts with us today, and to the participants, thank you for listening.